When it comes to self-development, no matter the method you use, the vital point is to practice. If you're ready to learn methods to transform your life and actively grow into the potential you know is inside of you, then you're in the right place. Welcome to The Vital Point. I'm your host, Jonathan Schecter. I'm a psychedelic integration and transformation coach, breathwork facilitator, and an enthusiast of personal growth. You have the capacity to evolve and bring your intentions and dreams into the world, and there's never been more access to so many incredible modalities that can help you on your journey. This podcast will help you learn about new methods to bring into your life, give you practices to follow, and share stories from practitioners who are doing the work so that you can feel inspired to go and practice, because that's the vital point. My guest today, I'm so honored to welcome Tristan Victor back to the podcast. Tristan is a first-generation Mexican entrepreneur, artist, and ICF certified life coach focused on integration and men's alchemy. He's the founder of STAYRIZEN, a psychedelic integration-focused community offering a network of education, resources, and guides exploring the intersection between psychedelics and personal development. And this is the second time that he's been on the podcast, which is awesome. It's nice to continue the conversation, get a chance to drop a little bit deeper and catch up with him, see what he's been up to over I think it's been about almost a year since we did our first episode. So Tristan, welcome.
Yeah, man. Thank you, brother. It's good to be back. And it's always nice to kind of come back into a space and do some like reflection about what our conversation was last year to what's most alive now, what's been happening. So it's really an honor, man, and happy to be here.
You know, one of the things that sort of kicked off my desire to have another episode was we were both chatting over IG about our microdosing practices. You know, I've been going through a few different cycles, and I know that microdosing is a big part of your coaching program as well, right?
Yeah, exactly, man. Yeah, microdosing has been kind of like a pillar for my own like personal transformation and like a catalyst to help me have something that's consistent and that I can build like a deeper relationship with, right? Like in opposing to like macrodosing, which for me personally is like nowadays like more rare. I haven't macrodosed in the last year. It's been something where it's a different type of relationship. Where microdosing, I've been more on like a protocol, and it's been something more consistent, and like there's so many different layers to it. You know, I microdose and go to the gym, and like I have these like quantum workouts where I'm just like, oh my god, like they feel like these different activations happening. You know, presence, microdosing, and nature. You know, deepening my relationship to nature, microdosing with my partner. You know, and like noticing the engagement and presence shift and our conversation and dialogue and emotional intelligence and clarity and communication. And so it's like I'm noticing it influence and impact all these different areas of my life. And with that medicine, it's been something that I've also been encouraging and sharing within my coaching programs and within the teachings, and then how others can hopefully build their own relationship in their own way, but have the similar impact in their life. So it's been great, man. And I have noticed a lot more people interested in microdosing and like curious and wanting to get started, and how do I approach it with more intention. So it's definitely, I feel it's been part of the collective energy in searching for these different tools for healing and structure and self-development and whatnot. So
Yeah, you mentioned intention. I think maybe that's a good thing to like dive a little bit more into, because I think that's what we actually started talking about on IG was like the intentional microdosing. And I know before we started recording, you know, you mentioned intentional, you know, working with psychedelics intentionally is like a big part of what you're about and kind of your focus, your vital point. So like for somebody that is interested in microdosing, but maybe has never done it before, Can you like explain a little bit more about what you mean about intentional microdosing and what that's meant for your practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing that comes up for me is I was just in the microdosing training session with a client, and I'll use this kind of within proper share for the sake of answering this question. But so this client basically like started a microdosing practice, but didn't really know anything about microdosing, but just received some medicine and was like, "Oh, I heard a couple things about this, and this sounds cool." And then microdosed like every day for about 5 days straight, and then was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm noticing all these feelings in my body. I almost like feel like I want to throw up, but I don't throw up, and I feel kind of like lifted, but like present." And so she was just kind of intuitively just trying to figure it out. And then so when she kind of came to me, she was calling in more intention. And what that looked like was going into a series of questions of like, okay, what is it that you're looking for? What is it that you want to work on, work with? What's most present for you? What are the areas in your life that you're experiencing the most challenge or struggle, right? And then so we started to go down more of like a series of questions to bring in more clarity of how can we use this medicine to help support us in integrating different aspects of our life, right? And so for this specific training, it was kind of getting deeper into kind of like money paradigms, and like wealth and like limitations within those areas, and how can we use microdosing to change that relationship, right? And then so with microdosing, right, microdosing is great because it gives us more opportunity to be receptive to new information, right? It works within the BDNF and serotonin 2A, so it gives us the opportunity to not only feel better and feel good, like similar to SSRIs with the serotonin 2A, but also the BDNF gives us the opportunity to kind of rewrite new behavior patterns and rewrite new ways of thinking, new allows different memory and different engagement with how we approach things in our life. So when we take that receptivity and we also start to add in and incorporate intentional practices for what you're specifically working on, for example, like if we're working on money or wealth, practices that we can start engaging in as we microdose is stepping into how we can explore how our relationship to money impacts our relationship to how we navigate, our self-worth, and incorporating practices like writing a love letter to money, personifying money and seeing what the language is that we use it, sitting with nature and seeing, connecting with the abundance around us, right? How we can have these systems of especially within a capitalistic system, and starting to see where the lineage goes in. One good example as well within this conversation is like I was sharing, for me personally, within the realms of microdosing and money and wealth, like getting really clear on like what story that I've been holding on to when it comes to money, with what was reflected to me, like the dichotomy of my parents offered like a polar experience of what money and what wealth means. Like my dad works two jobs. He's a very hard worker. He came from Mexico and became an entrepreneur. Also works at another job and became really good at saving. Really good at saving. Not spending a lot. And so his reflection to me was like, oh, money is something that I need to work really hard for, and money is something that I need to. It's either I make a lot of money or I spend time with family, right? Because my mom was the opposite end, where she would spend a lot of money, but was like experience oriented and like just spending a lot of time with us. But then she got into her own money situation, so had these polar figures representing different things for money, which created a story that it was either I have family and connections or I have money and savings. And so seeing how that played out in me, and then microdosing to help bring in more of how that felt in my body and how the story impacted my nervous system and impacting my behaviors around spending and saving, started to create more intention of what I was working with and how I could work with this medicine to create a different relationship with it, and then vice versa into what this client was also experiencing, what I was able to kind of share in my experience. And so all that to say, basically, like it could change dramatically how you approach microdosing when you bring in more intention into asking yourself these questions and getting more clear on why it is you're wanting to microdose, on how it could support you in certain areas in your life, what areas are you most struggling in, and also getting more aware of how it's working within your brain, how it's working within your system, the spirituality behind it, where this medicine comes from, how it could connect you more to your own lineage and your own ancestors, bringing a lot of reverence, bringing a lot of respect as we work with this medicine and engage with it. So, opposed to if someone's just taking a bunch of mushrooms or just microdosing just cause, and not that that's bad, but it could change your experience, so to say the least.
Yeah, it almost seems like you're able to take a few steps back or pull the lens out a little bit more and see a bigger perspective rather than being so involved in the stories and the sort of patterns or habits that you've had. It just gives you a wider view to start
Right.
To see which direction you want to look a little bit deeper in, like, oh, okay, I'm noticing that. Now let me explore that a little bit more, or this feels alive. So I'm going to kind of jump into this and really explore this at a deeper level. Whereas
Right.
when you're so close to everything, it's hard to see that perspective. You're so involved in the story
Right.
rather than like being able to
Yeah.
observe it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's something that's felt alive to me during my recent microdosing process as well, is like this idea that microdosing as opposed to like a macrodose, it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like you're integrating in real time as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
like having this ceremonial container and then having this really big experience and then having to go and unpack it and continue to like try to figure out, well, what am I going to do with this experience? Because sometimes we
Mm-hmm.
both know, right? Like during the macrodose experience, like a lot can happen, a lot can shift. And then you've got this big sort of thing that you've got to like work on and unpack and figure out how to integrate, as
Yeah.
opposed to like everything with microdosing is kind of happening in real time. It's sort of like
Mm-hmm.
more of a flow.
Yeah. Exactly. I like that you bring that up because oftentimes for me in my microdosing experiences, it's like, they say it's like years of therapy in one session. And at the same time, it's like, oh my gosh, there's all this awareness. What do I do with all of this? And it's like coming back into your daily life. It can feel almost overwhelming, or for me, it's like, where do I even start? That's kind of what led me into integration, where
Yeah.
it started becoming more about less storytelling and more deepening my practice. So instead of like getting more to like my storytelling, like, oh my God, it was this, and I learned this, and oh my gosh, you could probably learn this as much. And it became more of like just deepening my practice and deepening my discipline, deepening my structure, and deepening kind of my everyday life and my integrity to myself, my values, and that overall, for me has taken more time and more consistency, right? Sometimes I like the quote that sometimes integration is just chop wood, carry water. And with microdosing, I feel like it supports that. It supports more of like the remembrance of like, oh yeah, don't forget what I learned in that ceremony. Like I don't have to engage in this toxic behavior, or I don't have to, be okay with this type of self talk. And like when I have started to notice me kind of almost wanting to self sabotage or wanting to go back to previous feelings or behaviors that I'm trying to get away from or evolve from, I feel microdosing kind of gives kind of that remembrance aspect of coming back into frame, coming back into my intention, coming back into who I'm choosing to become and embody.
Yeah, I really like that. That's a good way of putting it, because like the setting up those foundations and like really asking yourself like who do I want to be, and like
Mm-hmm.
what are the things that I want to embody, what are the things that that feel alive to me, as opposed to what are the habits or maybe the patterns that I'm ready to let go of, so
Mm-hmm.
that if you do end up going to that macro experience, you're like almost more open and receptive to
Mm-hmm.
allowing the next level of changes to come in. It's it's a beautiful thing to be able to like do these huge quantum leaps and level
Mm-hmm.
ups, but like we can't always be doing that, right? Because we have to have some
Right.
sort of a home, some sort of a base to
Yeah.
operate from and still live in the world, right? Most of
Yeah.
us have jobs that we're going to, things that we have to integrate into, and like you're saying, like sometimes after that macro experience, you're kind of like, well, what am I doing? and
Right.
it's a little bit more challenging, as opposed to like, oh, the microdosing is helping to support this overall, um, sort of holistic kind of experience where it really
Mm,
is integrated, as opposed to being so like
mm,
juxtaposed to like the mystical ceremony
mm-hmm.
space.
100%.
And
Yeah,
you just finished like you just finished microdosing hike, right, with a
mm-hmm.
group of men. Is
That's
that
right.
something that you've been doing regularly?
Yes. So we started hiking with more intention and bringing in brotherhood about a few years ago. After I started working with more brotherhood, men's alchemy work. We had an LA group that we were a part of, and we're just kind of keeping the hikes consistent. We started incorporating microdosing to the hikes a few months ago to create a safe space for masculine identified relatives to be able to not only reconnect with ancestral medicine, for example, just reconnect with nature, the land, earthing, the elements, fire, wind, water, earth, and come back into learning about the plants and our allies within nature, sunlight, but also work intentionally with some medicine and have a safe space to do that. So we started bringing in the essence, like a big part of my journey has been like men's work and men's alchemy work, and it's been so important, like to see in my life how much I definitely need support and accountability, how much I value just having like brotherhood, and especially being in like I'm in a committed partnership and we've been together for almost 2 years. Like having all that reflection and having all that feedback and the medicine of like when my partner reflects to me, being able to kind of like have a support system of brotherhood to be able to just talk about it, and be like, bro, like this is, I don't know what to do right now, I don't know how to move through this. Being able to create a brotherhood within also a medicine space where we're also all microdosing, we're all in nature, we're all kind of connecting to that space. And so we have a structure laid out where we do prayer, intention. We just did a collaboration with a nonprofit, Black People Need Psychedelics. And that brought in more of like Tai Chi and more integration circle. And so we had more fundamentals added to it. And it was just really beautiful, man. Like seeing all the brothers come through, and most brothers have experience already with the medicine. So opposed to some previous hikes where some brothers were brand new to microdosing, so there's more time to kind of explain how this works and like what can come up and have more of those types of conversations. But this last hike was so cool because it's like everyone kind of like knew what's up, everyone kind of knew the vibe, like, hey, we've worked with the medicine before. So it was more of kind of like this brotherhood, man, like coming into nature and like laughing and talking, but also being in our own our own space of what we were bringing into the circle. And then we had check-ins, and then we had the Tai Chi flow, and then we had an integration circle, and just being able to see brothers kind of like open up and share about what's most alive in them, and like know it's okay to ask for support and ask for help, and also at the same time like be with the medicine and like have that kind of clarity come through, in just like a almost 4 mile hike, like how we can step into a space with certain things we're carrying, and then by the end of it feel a lot lighter and feel a lot more clear, so we can take that into our everyday life, back to our partners, back to our friends, back into our workspace, back into our association. And so that's been super game changer for me to have kind of a space like that to experience with brotherhood. And yeah, man, I mean, we're keeping it going. We're hosting them once a month and hoping to keep growing the brotherhood with some other things we got going on too. But yeah, man.
Yeah, that's great. I've been watching, some of the things that you've been doing over this year. I know you like did a Sacred Sons retreat, right? And just I really appreciate that about, about that about you, in terms of you sharing that, in terms of you supporting men's work, because it's such an important thing. When I hear you talk about your hike and like the environment that you're creating, the container that you're building, it's like, um, it made me think of sort of the opposite of like the way that when I was growing up, sort of like the opposite container, you know, a bunch of young men like basically getting together and sort of engaging in toxic, you know, masculinity, like not really doing anything to grow and to connect, and just sort of trying to be what we thought men were, you know, and taking the example that was around us that really wasn't very positive and really wasn't like that embodied, you know, divine masculine energy. And then, so, you know, to be able to transform that, to be able to create a better, you know, positive example is so important. And it's such a
Mm-hmm.
wonderful thing to see that movement continuing to
Mm-hmm.
grow and, you know, be supported.
Using, you know, the what chemicals are you being exposed to on a daily basis, make how clean is your environment, you know, looking at times, you know, mold exposure has been something that's been put in my awareness, especially, you know, growing up in an environment that wasn't necessarily so consistently disciplined in cleaning, not knowing, oh shit, mold is a thing that can actually affect me on a daily basis, looking at kind of different areas that can support us in being in our bodies, movement practices, yoga, asanas, walking, you know, connecting with people, relationship building, community building. And so we definitely look at like a holistic approach of the vibrational wellness techniques that are going to support you in your overall holistic wellness and healing as you microdose. And that also comes into like more of the intention driven practice, rather than just like seeing how it goes, but bringing in more intention of like, hey, well, you can see how it goes and you could also set yourself up for success.
Yeah, like I love that you mentioned the word protocol, you know, because like to me that the protocol and the intention go hand in hand, right? Like you're being more intentional, you're creating a structure so that you're not just, like you said, like let's just see how it goes, you know.
Yeah.
And there, I think there's like we're entering into this new age right now, right? Where like these medicines are more available, these energies are more available, and so I think that that's a really important thing to
Mhm.
remember, that it's okay to have structure. It's okay to have a protocol, especially if you're like looking to get a specific result out of,
Mhm.
you know, out of your work.
Mhm.
And, you know, obviously for clients that you're working with or that I'm working with, like that's why they're coming to us, right? Like it's not like,
Mhm.
well, I'm just going to work with you and see what happens. Like they're coming to us
Right.
with a specific thing. Like I want to work on this. You know, this is
Mhm.
something I want to change. So to have a
Mhm.
system, to have a protocol, um, is definitely like something that I believe in as well.
Mhm.
I definitely wanted to
Mhm.
touch on, you know, the STAYRIZEN protocol that
Mhm.
you have developed, and like learn a little bit more
Yeah.
about that if you're willing to share
Yeah.
that.
Most definitely, man. I get really I get excited because like it's been such a big part of my life, man. It's been like 5, 6 years since I started Stay Risen, and at first it wasn't a protocol. At first it was a mantra after my bit, you know, my first macro dose of medicine, and it was like I had this huge awakening, and I was like crying, and I was like sobbing, and I was laughing, and it was like a whole cluster of emotions, and I was younger at the time, and I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so much. I was like, I feel so connected. And coming back from that experience, all I remember was like, I just had to remember, like, don't, I was like, I was telling myself, don't forget that I access those feelings of joy, and I have access to those emotions. So my number one thing coming out of it was like, I just got to like remember, you know? And that's where I was holding the mantra to stay risen. I was like, I just have to stay risen, man. Like, I just got to hold this remembrance. And then throughout the time of growing in, building the community, it eventually, I had another, you know, insight and upload of like, oh, this is a protocol, and I laid out 5 different stages of it, and then it became like this whole practice that I started doing on myself, and started going through, and I was like, this is so good, man. And then I started sharing your community, and so the protocol is the Risen Protocol, RIZEN. And to go through it really quickly, the R is for remembrance, the I is for integration, the Z is for Zen, the E is for embodiment, and the N is for normalization. And so it always begins with remembrance, is remembering, right? We've been talking about it through our conversations, right? It's the value of remembering, and coming into remembrance, in such a quantum and multidimensional way, of remembering who we are, remembering that we don't have to fall back into old stories, remembering that we have access to healing, remembering, who we are in this reality, in this universe. It could, get very esoteric as well, remembering our connection to the all, to universe, spirit, God, source, energy, and then taking it down the process, right? So, okay, once you remember, you integrate that, and then once you integrate that, you bring it into Zen, and you're with the presence of it, and then you go into the embodiment, the daily practice, and then through that consistency of embodiment, then you normalize a new baseline of consciousness, you normalize a new way of being, you normalize, wow, who I was 90 days ago is a completely different person than who I am now, who I was, a year ago, who I was yesterday. It's through this practice. What I really appreciate about this protocol is that kind of it just points towards action and embodiment, rather than just being in the awareness of things, right? Because awareness is half of the work, right? Awareness of our behaviors, awareness of our actions, awareness of who we are, why we're doing what we're doing. But then the actual putting into practice and deepening and shifting your habits and understanding your day to day and your routine and how you show up, that I feel is really the juice to transformation. And then each kind of like pillar has its own kind of like little practice and protocol. We could go a little deeper if you'd like, but that's kind of like the overview of the Risen
Yeah.
protocol. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love it. Whatever you want to share, brother. I'm open for that.
Cool. Yeah, man, it's
Love
really
to
dope.
give the audience, that
Yeah.
that value as well.
Yeah, so it's really cool. This is something that when I just go on my own personal like macrodoses, or even just in microdosing, it's not even just working with plant medicine or any type of medicine. It's, after coming back from Burning Man, I went through this protocol, because Burning Man was like such a profound experience. It's so much more than a festival. It was like a whole life journey within that week being there. But this protocol can be used for any type of transpersonal, spiritual, religious, psychedelic experience, anything that kind of shifts our state of consciousness. It could be after a Vipassana retreat, it could be after deep meditation. But essentially it starts with the R, which is remembrance, and remembrance, it falls under awareness. And so it's about deepening our awareness and going to self-realization. And so self-realization is like realizing ourselves, similar to kind of like Yogananda and his teachings of the self-realization fellowship, of just like realizing the self, becoming very aware of who we are as a being, right? What's so cool about remembrance, I feel, is like in all traditions I've kind of been engaging in, there's always this kind of like pointing towards remembering. For example, like in Hinduism, there's like remembering that you're connected, right? There's Brahman and Atman, and so it's like remembering that you're connected to something bigger than you, like the self, essentially, like you're connected to all that's around you. It's like it kind of almost points to like you don't even exist. You're just a concept in the whole. By the same time, even in Mexica traditions, there's a word ometeo, which is a duality of life, that you're all of duality, you're all of reality. And so in like a bigger level, it's like this remembrance of our interconnected nature of all of reality. Then on like a individual level and a practical level, it's a remembrance of these insights that we get from these experiences, from a festival, from medicine, from whatever brings you to that space of like, oh, why I don't have to be that version of me anymore. I don't have to fall into that narrative, that script. Like there's this power in awareness of, wow, I'm the one writing my story in this consciousness, in this experience of consciousness and reality. So taking that remembrance, which I feel is happening all the time, and going into integration, which integration, it's like coming back into wholeness. For me personally, like integration for me is like more of like direction. It points to like, oh, okay, what do I do with this awareness? It points into like, what's next, what now? And that's kind of like the self-inquiry. And so from awareness, it kind of leads into integration, which is like the self-inquiry. You're asking yourself these questions of, what do I do now? What changes can I make in my life from this experience? What habits can I incorporate? How can I show up differently in my relationships, in my health, in my spirituality, in my connection to money? with that being said, going into integration, remembrance, integration for me is more about like direction and self inquiry. So traditionally, like integration is looked at as like piecing back in yourself into wholeness, which in its opposing viewpoint talks about fragmentation. Like where in our life are we fragmented? Where in our life are we kind of not fully allowing all of ourselves to be online? And in the Mexican tradition, there's a Spanish word called susto, and it's like translates like fear or being scared. And it talks about how in certain points in our life things are very traumatic or overwhelming. Our body, our nervous system, our spirit can get susto, can get fright, and can get scared, and that then creates a fragmentation of that part of ourselves stuck in that moment in the past. And so when it comes to integration, for me, it's like looking and sitting with what parts of ourselves are fragmented, what parts of ourselves are still stuck in a trauma loop back from years ago, from when you were a child. And it could be very heavy things to just things that, public speaking at school, and, being forgetting. There's actually a real thing for me of like forgetting my kind of speech at school and then feeling ridiculed and that holding a trauma in my body, and then noticing that come up when I was public speaking moving forward when I was a grown up, and being afraid of the ridicule. So integration for me is like a direction of self-awareness, going to self-inquiry of like, man, asking these questions. So the similar path can go to you of like, what are you going to do from this point on? What practices are you going to incorporate? What practices and habits is going to support you? It gives more direction into what I'm working with and what I can do about it, right? And so, for example, with the stage fright one, it gave me a direction of like, okay, I just got to put myself more in public speaking situations in real time, work with that. And so, setting up a game plan for that. I joined Toastmasters and started doing more public speaking and workshops, and it really healed a lot of those wounds from when I was a kid. So, for me, integration can also be really heady because it's a lot of just like writing down your game plan. It's like it could be a lot of journaling. It could be a lot of asking yourself these questions. It could be a lot of, what am I going to do from this moment on now that I have this awareness of this fragmentation, or now that I have this awareness of this part of me that I want to heal or bring forward. And so integration is kind of that modality that gives us the direction as we are doing the self-inquiry. So with that being said, because it could get kind of heady and could get very kind of like strategy oriented, the next stage naturally leads us into Zen. Zen is all about presence. It's all about kind of this being in the self-awareness of the here and now, right? Like Alan Watts, one of my favorite philosophers, he does such a great way of like explaining Zen to a Western audience, and it's just like a snap of a finger. It's just here and now. It's just being in the state of presence of all that is in what's most alive in you. And so, because you've been doing all this integration work, because you've been doing all this strategy work, because you went to the remembrance, it's giving yourself the kind of the spaciousness to just breathe, to just be with it, to be with where you're at now in this point in your life, because what you're about to get into is the embodiment, is the actual action based change that's going to make the difference, right? You're going to do the things that you set yourself up to do, right? You're going to start to wake up earlier, maybe get your circadian rhythms back into balance, as you're going to get into kind of like shifting, your diet with more Ayurvedic oriented practices. You're going to shift the communication within your partnership. You're going to actually do it and be consistent and hold a structure. And you might, they say transformation is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But the fact of the matter is that like it leads you into the embodiment, because now you're actually doing the thing, right? For me, it was like actually going and doing the workshop and like doing things more like in front of communities, so that I could actually feel the healing and be in the practice of it. And doing that for a consistent amount of time, you start doing it, you start being it, you start creating it, you start feeling it. It leads into the 5th stage, which is normalization, which is all about your impact. Because now your impact is different. Now who you're choosing to show up is different. Now how people perceive you is different, because now you're doing your own work. You're doing your own healing work. Impact is how you're impacting your family, your friends, your kids, your partners, your community, because you're going through this process of remembering and going to the self-awareness and developing integration strategies, and then being with yourself and then doing the actions. It normalizes a new state of consciousness for you. It normalizes a new way of being, a new way of how people can perceive you and receive you. And that for me is the self-actualization that Abraham Maslow talks about in his hierarchy of needs. It's like you go down, you go through the ladder, the triangle, the pyramid, and you reach the space of just actualizing all of yourself, because you're going through the integration. You're seeing where and what parts of you need that attention, that healing. And this is a continual cycle, which is why it's like stay risen. It's like it's not just a one-time thing, right? Like I sat with that one trip. It's like it's a continuous cycle, man. We're always evolving and transforming. So the staying risen, mindset and mantra and practice and protocol is like meeting yourself where you are now in your life, and then keeping this kind of like perpetuated cycle of growth and transformation. So that's kind of in a nutshell what it is. That's kind of what I guide people through, is each stage, at each process. And that's kind of what's helped me so much, have at least some type of framework and some type of structure to approaching integration and approaching like the work of transformation post medicine, post ceremony, post festival, whatever it is, post breakup, breakthrough. It's given me that kind of like, oh, okay, let's start back with the first stage. Like, what is this teaching me? What am I remembering about myself, and what does that lead me to do? So hopefully, for all of you listening, you could guide yourself through a similar process. You could ask yourself some of those questions and go through each stage, and notice how that can shift the way you work and approach integration. And hopefully it's a protocol that can be very impactful for your life.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Tristan. It is very powerful, and just like hearing you explain it makes a lot of sense in terms of starting with the awareness, the remembering, and that what do I want to bring in? What's my intention for integration, and then actually bringing that into presence, and being able to take action on it. And I love that you mentioned that that it's a cyclic, it's a continuous process, like a cycle. That normalization leads you back into that remembrance, leads you back into checking in. Okay, like two steps forward, one step back, right? Like, okay, what did I normalize? What am I still working on? What's alive to me now because I have taken those two steps forward? What am I resourced now to bring in, or what's coming up as a result of the work that I've done? And it's a beautiful protocol. Appreciate you sharing it.
Yeah, thank you, man.
So if people want to get a hold of you to work with you more, or learn more about this protocol, participate in the mushroom microdosing hikes, or anything else that you're doing, where should they go?
Great question. You can check out the STAYRIZEN community, STAYRIZEN. We're on Instagram. You can follow my personal account as well, which is I am Tristan Victor, IAM Tristan Victor. On Instagram is going to be the best way to kind of send me a message, or find me on Telegram, which would be an even better way to get in contact with me. But those are going to be the main ways, and I'm sure there'll also be a link that people can click and just get more connected with what's going on.
Awesome. This has been a great conversation. Really appreciate the opportunity to dive in a little bit deeper and find out what you've been up to. It's so nice to for me, to kind of compare our conversation that we had, almost a year ago, and some of the things that were alive for you, some of the things you were talking about, to the things that you've been obviously, working on through your own protocol, and normalizing, and exploring deeper. And it's just a beautiful thing to be able to hear you and ask questions, learn more about you, because I definitely feel a lot of camaraderie and resonance with the work that you're doing, and some of your story, like your experiences, and really appreciate you just coming on and being so open and vulnerable.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, man, and I appreciate the space to share. And yeah, man, thank you for the work that you're doing, the spaces that you're holding, and the people that you're supporting through your work and through your story. Much respect and deep reverence. And yeah, man, I hope to continue to build our friendship and our brotherhood, and continue to support as many people as we can, and keep this movement going.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would definitely love if I'm out in LA. Next time I'm out in LA, I'll make sure to check in and see if there's a hike coming up, because that's something I would definitely be into.
Yeah, man, please do.
Very cool. Well, hope you in the audience got something from this conversation. I think there's a lot to take away, a lot to chew on and think about and remember, so that you can start to integrate it into your own practice. And just like Tristan said, there's it's wonderful to have the awareness and the intention, but you also have to couple that with actually working, actually taking action, and making that into the embodiment and the normalization. So that really fits into the theme of the podcast, that the vital point is to practice, to take action. We can't just listen to a podcast and expect our life to change, or read a book and expect our life to change. It's also about taking those action steps. So I hope that this conversation inspired you to take that next step, whatever it is, that breathing into it, seeing I think we all have that thing that if we get still, we breathe into it, we know that's the next step. And maybe it's a little bit scary. Maybe we've been putting it off, but when we get still, we can really be honest about what it is. And I hope that this conversation inspires you to take that action, take that next step. And so until next time, my friends, keep practicing, because that's the vital point. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, I'd love it if you leave a review. Follow me on Instagram at Blue Magic Alchemy if you'd like to learn more about transformation, integration, and how to connect through coaching, breathwork, and meditation. Remember that regardless of the methods you're practicing, the vital point is to practice.